Today, we are going to be talking about the gift in resistance, and how to turn obstacles into insights. Thrilled to have you all here today, joining in and to share and to also learn from you as we talk about this very rich, deep topic. My name is Karali Pizzoli, and I am a consultant and a coach, and I have 20 years of experience in systems change and organizational change, starting with leading organizations and then working as a consultant. And I also coach doing Clifton Strengths coaching. So let's dive right in. We're going to be talking today about a fundamental reframe, moving from the idea that resistance is people refusing to change toward resistance is the system telling you what's missing. So we're going to be looking at resistance as a source of data, a way of understanding parts of our systems or organization that we might not have been noticing or paying attention to. So resistance draws our attention where it's needed, and so we're moving from how do I get people to change towards what is missing that could enable success. So you're not actually managing resistance, but building the conditions for success for your team and your organization. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the iceberg model, but just to review it really briefly, the top of the iceberg is what you would actually see if you were in a boat on the water, and that would be look like a little mountain sticking out of the water. You might not realize how much that more of the iceberg is under the water than is above the water. So what we see as a leader is overt actions and words and the intentional systems that we've put into place. And what we might not see is recurring patterns or repeated behaviors that might be undermining our change efforts, um, underlying unacknowledged systems and structures that are still playing in the background, and then mental models and beliefs that others may have, or we ourselves may have. So to apply this to resistance, we would look at this iceberg model here that shows that you have, the recurring patterns under the water level, underlying structures, and then the mental models. And today we're going to be focusing on the underlying structures because as a leader, your biggest lever of change is to think about how the work gets done, not just what the work is, but how people are working together. And when you change how people are working, it changes the impact that you have. Um, so we're looking at, the deeper down you go on this iceberg, the more impact the changes have. So if you can actually change mental models, the work changes the most. So we have, oh, so I thought I would stop here and ask you to put in the chat box any kinds of resistance that you are noticing in your organization that you have in mind. Perhaps what brought you to this webinar today or other types of resistance you've seen in your individual organization or in the kind of work that you do. Just giving you a minute to put something in the chat box. So I see resistance to system change. I see resistance to the use of evolving technology. That definitely comes up. So those are really great examples of resistance. A lot of times as leaders, we're trying to get people to do things differently. So, one way to look at this is in terms of conscious or unconscious and overt versus covert resistance. So, if it's conscious resistance and overt, it might be someone actually telling you they don't want to use that technology or they don't want to use the new system. Um, but if it's covert, it would be more like like quiet quitting or I'll back up so you can see the screen. Uh, or the hallway conversations where someone is they're criticizing initiative to others, but not to you. But the unconscious resistance would be perhaps missing deadlines or deprioritizing the work, not really intentionally, but not feeling they're able to engage fully. And that shows up. And then there's a systemic response when it's unconscious and covert. So this is just to get us kind of thinking about ways that resistance might be showing up, because we're going to dive into the four C's, which is some structural gaps that shape resistance. And my hope for you today is to come away with a deeper, more systems-based understanding so that you have more choices as a leader of the levers of change, so that you can use your energy on things that will make the biggest possible impact on the outcomes of your work. So I have four C's that are structural gaps that create resistance. One is clarity, connection, capacity, and coherence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those four C's, and then I'll be inviting you to apply them, and we'll have some discussion about how you see these playing out, or which ones you might see playing out in your organization or company. I have three case studies I'll be touching on as I talk about this work. So, one is a nonprofit organization that I consulted with that was implementing a major new project and scaling their work. Another is a New York City Public Schools initiative to improve mentoring for new teachers, where I was working citywide. I was in a nonprofit organization providing the training for those mentors, but I was also a consultant to the city on how best to provide mentoring. And then finally, founding and leading a public high school, which was my first big experience of leadership, and creating systems and adapting systems to the ever evolving experience of leading a public high school. So let's talk about clarity. I want to share with you what it looks like when you have a gap in clarity. First of all, it might look like different teams implementing the same initiative in wildly different ways because they all have a different view on what is actually being done. Managers might struggle to explain the change coherently. They don't have ownership of it. They haven't made it their own. People might be going through the motions, complying without fully engaging in the change. And there might be repeated questions as people are trying to understand because they haven't really grasped the big picture. So, what would be missing in that context is having actual processes for collective meaning making. And sometimes as leaders, we jump to assuming that because we gave the information, that people understood it. Like I said it, I told them, um, or as an old friend used to say, teaching by mentioning. So, for a leader, there's a mindset shift in what it takes for people to get to clarity, and that often is actual collective meaning making, and understanding the mental models that might be in the way, creating together a shared definition of success, and also going deeply into what's changing versus what's changing, what's staying the same. And so I want to share an example of the nonprofit that was launching a new project and scaling really quickly. Um, they had gotten a major new grant for a project that affected only part of the organization, and had to move very quickly into action to implement the grant. What this caused was a lot of firefighting, a lot of tactical decisions, but there was actually no big picture conversation, even at the executive team level, of what the impact was for the overall organization. And so even though they told everyone in the organization about the initiative, there was a lack of clarity about what were the implications of this for everybody's work. And people were working in increasing levels of silos. There was burnout happening. There was a lot of communication breakdowns of people not knowing what was going on. And so what we did together with them was to create a systems map and help the executive team create a clearer sense of priorities and connections between the different parts of the work of the different parts of the organization. Um, we did a shared visioning and create everybody on the executive team created a shared vision, but also a vision for their own department in relation to this massive new body of work. Um, and they also intended to take this to their team levels so that they would have everybody in the organization would be getting to do some shared visioning around the new shape and meaning and purpose of the organization now that it had taken on this new body of work. So that's what it takes to get to clarity and some of the impact of not getting to clarity. Connection is another really important one, and this could be connection in relation to the work or in relation to each other. So it could be like literally, if it's lacking in connection to the work, going into compliance but not taking initiative because this isn't mine. It doesn't belong to me. I'm just going to do whatever I'm told. Waiting for leadership to solve any obstacles, getting to quick agreement with no real discussion. So that work without connection is not going to have real impact. It's not going to get integrated. And when there's no connection to each other or a lack of that or a gap, that is results in lack of psychological safety, fragmenting under pressure. Uh, what I mean by real conversations in the hallway is where they're bad-mouthing the project to each other, but not to you. So these are the problems of connection, and I want to share an example from founding a public high school where we were really innovating in our curriculum, and we had a very strong commitment to having a deep community, both for teachers and students. And this was not the norm in public high schools in New York City. And we had to do it with the same resources everyone else got. So we had to be really smart about the way that we structured the work to create that sense of connection so that the teachers could and would innovate and so that the students could and would participate in this new type of education around project-based learning and real-world learning. Um, so we had teams. So we had grade teams. We had teachers that were teacher leaders who had both the technical expertise in their curriculum, but also were given leadership expertise to be able to lead their teams, supported to lead their teams. And then students also had teams. They had these advisory groups where they got to connect to each other more deeply and have a sense of community. So we even use like work style inventories like Myers-Briggs or Clifton Strengths to help them, both students and teachers understand themselves and each other more deeply. So attending to the social connection, but also to everybody's connection to the mission of the school so that the work could happen in a really integrated way, even though we were doing something that was a departure from the norm. With the same resources, we were able to create really exceptional results because we attended very deeply to that sense of connection to the work and to each other. Next one I'll talk about is capacity, which is both time and resources and skills and capability. And I want to use the example of the citywide effort in New York City to improve new teacher mentoring. So there was a recognition that the veteran teachers that were being tapped to train the new teachers had a lack of the skills, coaching skills. And so the organization I worked for, NTC, was tapped to train the veteran mentors over 2 years' time for each cohort. And so we were focused on building their skills and capability, right? But at the same time, the work at the city level wasn't done to bring those principals along. The school leaders and the district leaders did not create the time for that mentoring to happen at the building level. So it took us well over a year to begin to see the impact on student learning and teacher performance because there was a whole layer of bringing the principals and the district level along to build the time and resources into those teacher schedules for the mentoring to happen. So really understanding both the skills and the resources to prevent there being a strong start that fades or quality decline in other areas, and a reverting to old methods, all the things that we could see when there's a lack of capacity. And finally, I want to tell you about coherence, which, shouldn't be a shock to you, but it's so often what's missing. Because when we move into implementing a new plan really quickly, we often are lacking the big picture. So a coherence gap looks like parallel systems are running simultaneously. We get the new system up and running, and people are still using their previous system. They may have resources allocated in theory, but not in practice, which also goes back to capacity. Um, and so, like I was talking about before with the nonprofit that was scaling really quickly, they had these two initiatives that were treated as separate when they were actually really interconnected. Um, and there was a lot of confusion about the where the priority was in the organization. So what was missing was the things that you see: integration into existing workflows, um, retiring old systems, and and visibly prioritizing. So the nonprofit had there, as I mentioned before, there were silos and a breakdown of communication. And when we started to understand that there was a lack of coherence, that there was a lack of shared vision, we actually did a deep assessment with interviews and focus groups at every level of the organization to understand different people's experiences with the organizational culture. And that led us to see that there was this lack of shared vision and that there were real challenges in capacity, and the leadership team was pulling in different directions. So to understand a lack of coherence can involve a deeper look at the organization system. And what we did as a result was a full day retreat for the leadership to begin to create a new vision and a new understanding of how the systems applied across the initiatives. So coherence is crucial. And so that's our four C's. And I just wanted to come back to the iceberg, to look at, now that hopefully you're getting the idea of how these deeper underlying structures could create the visible resistance, that the visible resistance isn't located in each individual. It's actually in each individual who may or may not be thriving in the new plan, but actually it's deeper in terms of the systems and structures that might not be acknowledged. So that's why I say that you're not actually managing resistance, that you're building conditions for success. And there are leadership mental models that underpin that, that you might recognize in yourself or the people around you, around thinking that it's the people that are resisting when actually it's perhaps the systems that are not serving the goals. So I'm going to pause here. That was a lot of information, a lot of things to think about. And I want to give you a chance to think about either resistance pattern that you might have come in with or other patterns that you see in your organization that have come up as I've been talking about the four C's, where there might be a C that's missing or a structure that might be absent, and perhaps an intervention that you could use to address it. So I'm going to give you a chance to reflect a little bit, and perhaps you'd like to share. Take 5 minutes to think for a minute,
Mhm.
unless you already have something you wanted to say. You look like you had something to say already.
I mean, one thing that popped into my mind right away is just particularly when being in a community where we were innovating, and now some of it is like maintaining and making sure that when new staff members are coming on, that we are making sure that we're making the space to make it clear why we do what we do, right? So that to me falls into capacity building, but also connection, right? Because like there has to be an understanding of why we do what we do, the purpose for you to really feel like you're a part of it. So that was on my mind, is like when there is, like how are we making sure that we're shoring up a reminder for those that may have been here for a long time to think about it, but also for those that are coming on new, that we're not just onboarding you into the logistics, that we're really making sure that we are including you in the vision and mission.
Mm, that's very powerful because otherwise you can really have kind of a mission creep as they're
Hmm.
doing things because that's the way they're supposed to be done and maybe not.
Right. And especially when it's still different from what may be at other schools or maybe the norm, right? So like it's not just kooky here, right? There's intention, there's reason. And if we're not making sure that we're spending the time to make that clear, it can create those like whole bay conversations. And I think sometimes it does happen, right? Because it sometimes is harder or more work, right? And like, but there's clear reasons for the students. And if we're not making that transparent, I think it can be taken for granted the why. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think are some interventions that might address that?
I mean, right away, I was just starting to think about like, how do we go back to incorporating the visioning, right? Like, incorporating our people into the visioning without like doing a hokey mission statement piece, but just really making sure that, for me as a leader to consistently include the why, right? So that was what was on my mind right away, even as we're, we try to use the end of the school year to think about the upcoming school year, right? And so making sure that it's not just about logistics, but tying back why, like the origin story and giving people a chance to reflect on why they chose this community was also on
Mm,
my mind, right? So that was right away. I was thinking about like the next time we're together, giving people a chance to truly step back and think about that why.
yeah. Do you feel like it's easy to for you to speak to it and maybe not to create the time for people to have those conversations?
Right, because there's always something to be done, right? And so like that's also on my mind is like how making sure that this is something, if it's something that matters, that we're really prioritizing making the space for that conversation. And like, what does that mean, right? Is something falling off? And then is something actually falling off, or can it eventually move quicker, right? Because people have a deeper understanding.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It is definitely that sounds like it's in the what we call the quadrant of the important but not urgent. And the more time that leaders spend on the important but not urgent, the more effectively an institution can grow and change and adapt.
And there's a tension because it always feels like the urgent it's in your face, right?
Mhm.
And so like for me to not jump to solution building and to actually create the conditions was what's
Mhm.
resonating with me right now too.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So where we're headed here is to just, I'm going to be sending you a takeaway, which is a toolkit that has information from the slides about addressing resistance through the four C's and the iceberg model, but it also has some great resources on how to respond to resistance in the moment and thinking through what resistance looks like from all of the four C's in a given interaction. So I'll be sharing that with you. And I want to thank you for participating in the webinar today, and I look forward to supporting you moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.